Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa. Amma ba'du fa'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون. صدق الله العظيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا مولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. At this time of the year, there are a few points to sort of tie up. One of them is with reference to missed fasts. It's important to know that we shouldn't overlook this when we complete the month and Eid is over. فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. We have to make up the missed fasts on other days, whether this is done together or separately, whether it's done immediately after Eid or during the rest of the year. Many of our sisters accumulate many missed fasts because of their monthly cycle or because of children, childbearing. And so it's necessary to keep a record of this and to make these fasts up. And it's perfectly valid to make them up in winter time as well when the fasts are short. So this is one aspect. The other is relating to the Sadaqatul Fitr, also called Zakatul Fitr. And a couple of points here. It ought to reach the deserving people before Eid prayer. And so wherever you're giving it, please ensure that you send it forth as soon as possible. The original sunnah, the actual method is to give grain. It's either wheat or barley or dates or raisins. These are all foods which you can survive with. Pure nourishment. Dates are a staple and raisins are also used in this way. However, the fuqaha of the Hanafi madhab say it's permissible to give money instead for the same value. And that's also a sahula and ease for us because it may not be possible for you to present food of this sort to a needy person. You have to give Sadaqatul Fitr on your own behalf and on behalf of your children as well, -2 if you are above the threshold of zakat. If you are a sahib nisab, you possess the minimum amount which is necessary. In cash, this is a little over £200. And the passage of a year is not necessary as it is with zakat. If you have this money on the day or you come into possession of it during the day, it will become necessary. And this is why all mature children, teenagers for example, many are likely to have this kind of money. So if there are no debts, then, and this is surplus money, this is saving, then such an individual ought to give Sadaqatul Fitr. Just like zakat, you can give Sadaqatul Fitr on somebody else's behalf too, with their permission. So you can give it on behalf of your mature children if you wish to. Let them know so they know that they are absolved of the responsibility. Or you can give it on behalf of your wife or your husband, and that's perfectly permissible too. So those are just a few sort of general points which we might like to keep in mind at this time of the year. G.
Is it permissible to shave the throat hair when you have a sunnah beard?
Is it permissible to shave the throat hair when you have a sunnah beard? The hair on the throat is not part of the beard. The word in Arabic is lihya, which refers to the jawbone. So hair on the throat is not part of the beard, and so it's not necessary to keep that. G.
There's a long question here about the permissibility of reading Salah on a chair. So can you give it?
Permissibility of reading Salah on a chair.
And the Jamaat as well.
Sorry?
And
within a congregation as well. Yeah, this is an important question, and we need to understand first of all that the actual ruling for standing in prayer is that it is fard, except in nafil prayer. In fard and wajib prayer, so in your fard prayers and in your watr, it's necessary to stand up if you can. In nafil prayer, you can sit down and perform the prayer. but you'll get half the reward if there's no valid reason for doing this. It's an option, but you get half the reward, as is mentioned in the hadith. Now, what if you can't stand? If you can't stand, then the sunnah, and this is taught to us by the example of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is to sit on the floor. Now let me get this very, very clear. Very, very clear. Anyone who thinks that there were no chairs in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not just ignorant of deen, they're ignorant of general knowledge and history. Elaborate furniture existed in the time of the Egyptians, Fir'aun, centuries before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to this world. And there were many other civilizations and societies who had all sorts of elaborate items and furnishings. So, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has sat on a chair, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a bed. It was the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to sleep on a sarir, not on the floor. As is popular knowledge, it's sunnah to sleep on it's established to sleep on the floor too. It's sunnah to use a sarir with a firm surface, a board. This is established from the sunnah too. So this idea that this was the reason is a false one, that it wasn't possible. That's not true at all. The Prophet ﷺ taught us to read Salah on the floor. There were a couple of occasions. On one occasion, he was injured after taking a fall on a horse, and he was reading Salah in the house for some time. The other occasion is in his final illness and in his old age as well. At night time, the Prophet ﷺ would perform some Salah sitting down. So sitting down on the floor, the way you do in at-tahiyyat is the way you will sit if you can and you can't stand. Now, it's not confined to sitting like this. The fuqaha say that you're allowed to sit on the floor in whatever position you can manage. So if you can't sit on the floor as you do in at-tahiyyat with your knees bent, you are allowed to sit cross-legged on the floor and perform salah with ishara if you can't do full sajda. And if you can't sit cross-legged, for the person who has no other way of sitting, such a person can actually sit with their feet spread forwards. Now let us understand how to perform salah sitting down on the floor to begin with. First of all, you would do ruku by bending over virtually flat. It would be like this. And you would do sajda in the normal way. So it would be Allahu Akbar, you tie your hands in the normal place that you would normally tie them, and then in ruku you'd put your hands on your knees, and in the tahiyyat you'd put them on your lap. So you'd bend over flat if this is possible for you. If there's no physical prevention, nothing preventing you physically because of illness or a problem with joints and so forth. And you would do sajda in the normal way and you'd sit up straight again. That is the proper way of doing it. Now, the only person who doesn't do this is the person who cannot sit on the floor. Now, this is an important point. So, what people are doing is they're missing out on standing up because they can't do sajda on the floor. Now, the Hanafi position is that if you can't do sajda on the floor, then you're allowed to perform salah on the chair. And by the way, this isn't just a Hanafi issue. Ask ulama from all backgrounds. Ask ulama from any background. This is something which ulama across the spectrum are very unhappy about, this modern trend. And what's happening is less about finding out what's permissible for you and more about sort of copycat. Everybody else is doing it, so you do it. And so no one bothers to find out whether it's permissible for them. And as such, a person who is able to perform sajda on the floor, such a person's salah isn't valid on a chair. It's not correct to do that. Now don't get me wrong here. It's permissible for some people to perform salah on the chair because they cannot lower themselves to the ground and do sajda on the ground. They can't go onto the ground for various reasons. They may have joint problems, other problems. But we know for sure, without a shadow of doubt, that a large proportion, perhaps more than half, a large proportion of people who should be performing salah on the floor or even standing up and normally their fard prayer, they're not doing that. And it's unfair actually, because what this does, it brings into focus the whole group. And so we have to discuss it like this. So why should we view with suspicion people who genuinely can perform salah on a chair? Why should we view those people with suspicion? We don't want to point fingers at them at all, because they are allowed. I know, for example, one gentleman, an elder in our community, he injured his back after a fall. His spine was damaged. And after this, he continued to perform salah on the floor for as long as he could. But then it became impossible for him. And so he started performing on a chair. Now, I know personally that for a person like him, he has a very valid reason. But I also know for sure that many people are performing salah on chairs and they shouldn't be. So take the trouble to find out. Now, it is permissible to perform salah on a chair when you cannot on the floor. And even then, you should be bending over as far forward as you can for your ruku. And for your sajda, it should be further than you do for your ruku. So this is important to know, at least for your fard prayer. Now, and so the advice here is find out your own circumstances, consult an alim, and find out if it's permissible for you personally or not. And remember, in salah, we are supposed to tolerate a degree of inconvenience. There's a difference between inconvenience and severe pain. Yes, if it's inconvenient, that's not a permissible reason. Ease doesn't mean that you just do what you like and there's no rules. So having said all of this, is it permissible to perform salah in a chair in a masjid? Yes, it is. For those for whom it's permissible to perform salah in a chair and they can join the congregation. So those are just some aspects relating to this question. Ji.
Do you have to read Tarawih namaz for fasting in the month of Shawwal?
Do you have to read Tarawih namaz for fasting in the month of Shawwal? No, certainly not. Tarawih namaz is exclusive to Ramadan. You can read tahajjud all year. Ji.
Can you read Eid namaz at home? If so, how do you perform Eid namaz?
Can you read Eid salah at home? If so, how do you perform Eid salah? Question which everybody's asking at the moment. Now, there's a spectrum of opinion here, and the opinion which I'd like to share with you, after consulting with other scholars as well, is that if you've been performing Jummah at home, because you have the numbers in your household, and you're able to perform Jummah, then you ought to perform Eid prayer at home too. And if you haven't been performing Jummah, and you've taken the position that Jummah isn't permissible in the house because there's been both opinions, then there's a question mark over performing Eid prayer at home. Or because you don't have the sufficient numbers in your house of adults to perform the Jummah prayer and the Eid prayer. The method of performing Eid prayer, the rules of Eid are very similar to the rules of Jummah. The etiquettes are very similar too. The time for Eid prayer is after sunrise, after the makruh time is over, some 10 minutes after sunrise, up to Zawal. This is 10 minutes before Dhuhr. It can be performed at any time during this period. For Eid al-Fitr, it's better to delay it a little. And for Eid al-Adha, it's better to perform it early. But this entire period is permissible for Eid prayer. The difference between Jummah and Eid is that in Eid prayer, there's no adhan and there's no iqamah. It's 2 rakats of wajib prayer with 6 extra takbirs. And the khutbahs are after the prayer, not before. And the khutbahs are sunnah. They're not a rukn and an essential part. In the sense that if they were to be omitted, the prayer wouldn't be valid. It is valid, but they shouldn't be omitted because sunnah, and you should uphold the sunnah. The method of performing Eid prayer is that you make the intention of performing the 2 rakats of Eid prayer, which is wajib, with the 6 extra takbirs. 3 takbirs in the first rakat and 3 in the second. So you say Allahu Akbar, and then you say Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, and then before going into Surah Al-Fatiha, you say takbir 3 times, raising your hands each time. Allahu Akbar once, Allahu Akbar twice, and on the third occasion, Allahu Akbar, and you fold your hands. Then you proceed with A'udhu Billah, Bismillah, Surah Al-Fatiha, which you read aloud if you're leading the prayer, and then some qira'ah of Quran. You go into ruku, you go into sajda as before, as per normal, and then you go into the second rakat and you recite your Surah Al-Fatiha, your surah, and then you don't go into ruku. You say your 3 extra takbirs of the second rakat. Once Allahu Akbar, twice Allahu Akbar, 3 times Allahu Akbar, and then you go into ruku. So if you think of it like this, the first 3 are before Surah Al-Fatiha in the first rakat, after thana, and the second 3 are before ruku in the second rakat. And these are wajib takbirs. And then you finish off your salah as before. And then the khutbah, you can use the same words that you use in the Jummah khutbah. That's perfectly fine. But you would add the takbirat at the beginning of both khutbahs and during those khutbahs. Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Wallahu Akbar, Walillahi alhamd. Etiquettes of Jummah and khutbah, Jummah and Eid are very similar. To wake up early, to take a bath, to come early to the place of salah, to do miswak, to apply perfume, and there's no nafils before or after the Eid prayer. For those who can't perform the Eid prayer, there are some athar which suggest that you can perform your ishraq prayer. Your ishraq prayer, which is the nafil prayers which is performed after sunrise. You can perform 2 rakats of nafil prayer or You can perform 4 by performing 2 plus 2. The sisters can do the same thing. This is not Eid prayer, but it's a substitute for those who can't perform Eid prayer, because it's established in some of the athar that if you've missed your Eid prayer or you're not able to attend or perform it at home, just perform 2 to 4 rakats of nafil prayer at that time. The intention will not be Eid prayer, it'll just be as nafil prayer. G.
Assuming you do have the right number of people, can you just reconfirm? Is that minimum 4 males?
Yeah, there's 2 positions in the Hanafi madhab. It's a total of 4 males or a total of 3, including the imam. There's both positions, so it's better to have 4 rather than 3 because there are both positions. There's a difference of opinion here. G.
And what time can this Eid prayer be read?
Eid prayer is read between sunrise, after the makruh time, to before dhuhr, 10 minutes before dhuhr.
Next question. I owe a non-Muslim £50 from years ago, and I've lost contact with that person, and I cannot get in touch with them. What do I do? Do I give sadaqah on their name £50? Or do you suggest?
Yeah, I owe a non-Muslim £50. I can't get in touch with him. What do I do with the money? Yeah, you should give it in sadaqah, and you should also continue to pursue and search for that person if you can. If you find them, then they are still entitled to that payment. G.
So if you pay the sadaqah,
yeah, you still have to pay them. Yeah. It doesn't absolve you of your responsibility to make the payment to them. G. But it's not your own, you see. G.
Why do many people do a Quran khatam when someone passes away? This was not practiced at the time of the Prophet.
Why do many people do Quran khatam when a person passes away? This was not practiced at the time of the Prophet. That's what the questioner is saying. Okay. So basically, let us understand that the Prophet ﷺ gave us principles, and the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum showed us how to act according to those principles. Let's take the example of Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu. The Prophet ﷺ gives him the glad tidings of being in Jannah, that he can hear his footsteps in Jannah. He asks him what he does. Rasulullah is asking what Bilal does. Bilal says, I read 2 rakats after my adhan, after the adhan. So this is his own amal. And there are other examples like this. Once Rasulullah turns after Salah towards the congregation, and he asks, who read this tasbih after the ruku? رَبَّنَا لَكَ الْحَمْدِ حَمْدًا كَثِيرًا طَيِّبًا مُبَارَكًا فِي مُبَارَكًا عَلَيْكَ مَا يُحِبُّ رَبُّنَا وَيَرْضَى. He says, who said these words? And the Sahaba were frightened because they were in awe of Rasulullah at all times. And the Prophet asked repetitively, and then very tentatively, one Sahaba in a meek voice, he said, yes, it was I. And he was given the glad tidings that 70,000 angels came to receive your tasbih. This was his own amal. So we need to understand that in optional ibadah, there's a lot of flexibility. No one's going to challenge you for reciting 3 juz or 3.5 juz in a day. You can choose how much you recite in a day because it's your nafil ibadah. This is one point. The second point is, can you do a'mal on other people's behalf? Well, for some a'mal, it's clearly established in the hadith and there's no difference of opinion. So for example, to do hajj on behalf of another person, the Prophet ﷺ described this as a debt. If you do it on behalf of your parent, it's mentioned in hadith. You can do hajj on behalf of another person, and you can do it if they've passed away. So this is one example. So what else can you do? We know the sadaqah jariyah is mentioned in hadith. So the children, the a'mal they do, will benefit the parents after they've passed away. Dua will help. That's a form of sadaqah jariyah too, because it's an ibadah. It's not just the fact that you're asking Allah for your parents to raise their status. It's also an ibadah which Allah is rewarding them for because you're doing that ibadah. So there's flexibility here. This is one point. The second point is that this is a point in which there is a difference of opinion in the ummah. But many, if you look at the mutun, the legal texts of the Hanbali madhab, it's clearly stated in Janaiz, in the books, in the section relating to the funerals, that you can recite Quran on behalf of somebody else and the reward will reach them. So this is something which the fuqaha understand in the light of the Quran and Sunnah. Now, one of the issues today is, the literalists, the Zahiriyya, want to see everything explicitly mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah. But the Quran and Sunnah are a criterion, they're a constitution. So they'll give us the principles. So for example, In the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was wine, there were some alcoholic drinks, but you didn't have the variety of intoxicants that you have today. So you will not find the word dope and weed in the Sunnah or in the Quran. You won't find those words in that particular wording. You won't find the word ecstasy and crack and what have you. But what you will learn from the Quran and Sunnah is anything that intoxicates is not permissible. You will learn the principle, and the principle will be applied to the breadth and width of everything. And this is how the Sharia works, because it's a constitution. And this is why you need ijtihad. This is why you need fuqaha who understand the ilal, the reasoning behind the Quran and Sunnah. And this whole subject of ilal, in many ayats of the Quran, Allah tells us the reason why He wants us to do something or not do something. In many ahadith, Rasulullah SAW mentions the reasoning. So we know that there is wisdom behind a particular ahkam. So when there's no clear prohibition, and there's an absolute understanding in the senior salaf of the ummah, in the first generation, that this is permissible and it's acceptable, then there's no reason why those who choose to do that can't. And it's not about if people formalize it and gather together for khatam, and people who don't are criticized. It's not considered as an optional act. It's given the darajah of wujub, and days are fixed for it in the sense that it has to happen on the 3rd day or the 10th day or the 40th day or on the anniversary. That will become a bid'ah. But if it's done as a sort of open action, people who choose to recite Quran with the intention that inshaAllah this reward, Allah Azza wa Jal will give this reward on our behalf to the person who's passed away, then it is the opinion of many fuqaha of the ummah that in the light of the Quran and Sunnah, this is acceptable. Ji.
Can we pray Salah with shoes on if I'm reading on the street?
Can we perform Salah with shoes on if you're reading on the street? If your shoes are not impure and you can bend your feet appropriately as you meant to in sajda, then it will be okay. It's not ideal. Your feet, your toes need to bend like this. They need to be facing the qibla. You're not supposed to put your feet like that when you're in sajda. Ji.
What do you do when you make a mistake in the adhan?
What do you do when you make a mistake in the adhan? If you've mispronounced a word, you can repeat it. It depends what the mistake is. If you've missed words, if you've missed sections of the adhan completely, there may be a need for the repetition of the adhan. There are some errors which do deem the adhan to be invalid. And one mistake which I'd like to mention here, I think this one's important, it's a tangent. A lot of people give the adhan very quickly. And some fuqaha have said that if you don't pause between the kalimat of adhan, not iqama adhan, then it needs to be repeated. So this is an area where people need to be more cautious perhaps. Ji.
If you have missed fard prayers in the past, can these be made up with extra nafil prayers?
If you've missed fard prayers in the past, can they be made up with extra nafil prayers? Fard prayers need to be performed. If they've been missed, they need to be made up as fard prayers. What you can do with nafil is that you can add to the virtue. So our fard prayers are poor in quality, so we can add to our credit the sunnah and nafil prayers, because the sunnah are the mukammilat of the fara'id. That's what the sunnah does, it perfects our fara'id. So the shortcomings of our fard are sort of enhanced with our sunnah and nafil prayer. Ji.
Can I pay zakat from auction money? I have made niyat, whatever I get from this auction for these items, I'll give towards zakat.
Can I give zakat from auction money? Auction money, if you're auctioning something which you're selling and you want, then that earning is like any other earning. So why is that a problem? If what you're selling is jaiz and auction, to buy or sell in an auction is permissible, then that money will be added to your pot, and if you reach the threshold, then you do give zakat. Ji.
What are the best actions to carry out when visiting a graveyard?
What are the best actions to carry out when visiting a graveyard? The Prophet ﷺ says, I had prohibited you from visiting graves, but the Prophet ﷺ says, but now I say to you, fazuruha, visit graves. So this is established, it's mentioned clearly in Sahih narration. So one of the reasons for this is, which is mentioned in hadith, it reminds you of death. It reminds you of the akhirah. So really, one thing which we miss out on perhaps in this day and age, everything else people do, but reflection is something that's too much distraction. Never fair to generalize, there are always exceptions. But the distraction of the phone and other people, socializing with people in the graveyard, the cemetery. Unfortunately, this is a very sad state of affairs. Even during the janazah and burial, it's not really an occasion to meet and greet. Now, you find yourself in a situation where you have no option. Someone approaches you and greets you, what are you going to do? You're going to respond to them, yeah, out of common courtesy. But then the string of conversation, it's not the time and place. In the graveyard, it's meant to be about thinking about death, thinking about the akhirah, and the Sahaba would do this all the time. You would see so many examples. Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu would weep so profusely when he would see a qabr, because he would think of this step, the stage of our journey. And so we ought to think of death. And of course, we can do dua for the people. You say salam, assalamu alaikum ya ahl al-qubur, wa inna insha'Allah bikum lalahiqun. You can say salam to the people in the cemetery. And of course, we've just discussed reciting Quran, whether it's there or anywhere else at home. You can recite Quran if you wish to do so on behalf of those people. Ji.
Why are women discouraged from visiting the graveyard even when there is no threat of them crying aloud?
See, why are women discouraged from visiting the graveyard? Let me explain that. See, we don't make rules up as we go along. And so, this whole thing about satisfaction, what does the Quran say? And this includes everybody, males and females. The Quran says in Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Baqarah was revealed in Medina Munawwara. Surah Al-Baqarah was revealed in Medina Munawwara. So when the Surah Al-Baqarah talks about the believers, it's talking about the believers who were present in Medina Munawwara when the surah was revealed. And these were the Muhajirin and the Ansar. It includes other believers who came later by extension, by virtue of the fact that they follow in their footsteps. Not otherwise. If they don't follow in their footsteps, then they won't necessarily be included at all in those promises, in those virtues. And this applies to the whole Quran. So Surah Al-Baqarah, when the believers are mentioned in the Quran, the primary sort of reference is to the Sahaba, and by extension anyone who follows in their footsteps. Think of a masjid. You have the first row and the second row and the third row. The first row is the Sahaba. The second row, the Rasulullah is the Imam. The second row are the Tabi'een. The third row are the Tabu'ut Tabi'een through the generations. So if you just think of this as a metaphor. So the Sahaba are the ones who received the Quran. When the Quran talks about the believers, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, is talking to the Sahaba. It's talking about the believers, it's talking about the Sahaba. Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum, I completed your deen for you, it's talking to the Sahaba. And anyone else who joins them, if they don't join them, they're not part of the team. You see? And that's why they're referred to as tabi'een in the Quran as well. People who follow in their footsteps. And they're the sabiqeen, the forerunners. So keep this in mind. Now, Surah Al-Baqarah is revealed in Medina Munawwara, and it's referring to the believers of Medina Munawwara, the Muhajirin and the Ansar. What does Allah Ta'ala say? The end of the first juz, last page. فَإِنْ آمَنُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا آمَنْتُمْ بِهِ فَقَدْ اهْتَدُوا. If they have iman as you, in the plural, amantum, as you have iman, as you have believed, then they are on the right path. فَقَدْ اهْتَدُوا, they're on hidayah. وَإِن تَوَلَّوْا, if they turn away, فَإِنَّمَا هُمْ فِي شِقَاقٍ, then they're in misguidance and disagreement. Now, this being on this threshold, this benchmark of iman is the iman of the Sahaba. It's the deen of the Sahaba. Allah is saying, you want to be a true mu'min, you have to follow the Sahaba. And that's the point. So what the Sahaba did, male or female, they weren't weaker than us. If you think that they were emotionally, the female Sahaba were emotionally weak and we are strong, that's ignorance. Because think of Uhud, think of, Ahzab, think of the hunger and the loss, the Prophet ﷺ's wives. Except for Aisha radiallahu anha, all of them were widows. And the Prophet ﷺ raised many children from his wives, from the previous husbands. He married them, and one of the lessons the Ummah was taught by this is how he looked after those orphans. And there were other Sahaba like this. So we need to understand the context of the lives of the Sahaba. And thereafter, we simply embrace what they taught us, what Rasulullah ﷺ taught us, what the Sahaba taught us. That's how we take our deen. And that's the version which will take us to them on the day of Qiyamah. And I think that should be sufficient. It's not about just thinking about what, in today's world, we could do it like this, we could do it like this. Yeah, well, we'll start changing this, and we'll start changing this, and we'll start changing this. And we'll end up with something which to our hearts and minds may be very attractive, beautiful, appropriate. And then on the day of Qiyamah, will be considered part of a different group, and we don't want that to happen. So it's about love for Allah, His Rasul, at the essence, at the core, and the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, and following in their example. Ji.
What is the best dua to make when completing the Quran at home?
What is the best dua to make when completing the Quran at home? There's no single dua that you make. The point here is that it's an occasion of acceptance, and when you make a dua, always include the duas from the Quran and Sunnah first, the masnoon duas, the duas in the Quran, because they are comprehensive and they cover everything we need. And in addition to that, make your specific permissible requests to Allah relating to your deen, dunya and akhirah, and always include other people, everybody else, especially the people who have rights over you, your parents and relatives and anybody you've benefited in deen from. All of those people should be included. And you should make dua for the previous generations of Muslims as well, including the Sahaba and Tabi'een, that Allah raise their ranks and reward them on our behalf. رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لَنَا وَلِإِخْوَانِنَا الَّذِينَ سَبَقُونَا بِالْإِيمَانِ وَلَا تَجْعَلْ فِي قُلُوبِنَا غِلًّا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا رَبَّنَا إِنَّكَ رَءُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. So there's no single answer to that question. Just make sure that you ask for something which is appropriate and permissible when you add your own duas at the end. And start off with the duas of the Quran and Sunnah, because they are the best ones to make. They're the most comprehensive, and that's why they've been taught to us in the Quran and Sunnah. Ji.
What ibadah can women perform while going through their cycle?
What ibadah can women perform when they're in the cycle? They can do any form. They can do dua. They can read all the masnoon duas. Any masnoon dua. They can recite the duas of the Quran as duas, but not as recitation, which means with the intention of dua. So, La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu min al-zalimin. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasana. Many of the ulama say that if the last two surahs, the mu'awwidhatin, qul a'udhu bi rabbil falaq, qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas, are recited as du'as, because they're du'as too, not as recitation, that's okay too. They can read tasbih, subhanallah, alhamdulillah, la ilaha illallah, Allahu akbar, la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu lahul mulku wa lahul hamdu wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir, and do salat and salam upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All of this is permissible. Ji.
Can they read the Quran on their iPad or similar devices?
Can they read the Quran on their iPad or similar devices? There's two aspects to this. One is reading with the eyes to study. To read with the eyes to study is permissible because you're not reciting. To recite with the tongue isn't permissible, and to touch the Quran isn't permissible, and you shouldn't touch the screen either if it's on the screen. And this is a question I did answer in a little detail in one of the earlier sessions as well.
We are getting a lot of repeat questions today, Monasab,
Ji.
from a lot of viewers.
Mhm.
Can you please advise on how to concentrate in Salah and reading Quran?
Can you please advise on how to concentrate in Salah and reading Quran? Right, okay. It is a repeat question and there's no single answer to this either. Okay, let's just look at various angles. The first point is the preparation for Salah. Ensure that your body is fully pure. So there's no impurity on the body. That you perform your wudu thoroughly. Performing wudu thoroughly doesn't mean using lots of water. We all use too much. It doesn't mean taking extra time. It just means making sure that you're doing it according to the sunnah. And during wudu, we ought not to think about and talk about the dunya. And then it's about coming to the musalla on time. So whether you're performing at home or wherever you are, your prayer mat, the place of prayer, come to it with intent. I'm about to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you make your niyyah with full concentration that I'm about to engage in, I'm about to sort of go into the state of ibadah in which I'm severing my ties with everything and everybody. In fact, some of the mashayikh say that when you raise your hands to your ears, one of the implications of this is that you've thrown everything behind you and now you're just focusing on salah. So it's about the preparation as well. In salah, it's about practice and constantly reminding oneself that one is in salah. And this can be achieved, you can gain strength in this by focusing on the words of the recitation. Now on my thana, subhanakallahum wa bihamdik wa tabarak asmuk wa ta'ala jadduk. Now I'm reciting Surah Al-Fatiha. So I ought to know what I'm reciting. Where am I in my salah? It ought not to be autopilot, so to speak. In addition to this, it's a good idea to memorize the meanings of what we recite in our salah. So of the thana, the tasbihat, Surah Fatiha, and of the other surahs which we regularly recite. It's good to know the meaning as well. And if we know the meaning, then we ought to focus on the meaning. And it's the same when reciting Quran. So this is a constant battle that we need to continue to move forward in. We need to win this battle. And our obligation is to keep trying. Remember, if you try your best and it's still difficult, you are being rewarded for your effort. the effort is actually full of reward. And sometimes a difficult act of ibadah is more reward worthy. There's more reward in it for you than one which is easy. So when it's Ramadan and it's the 27th, 29th night, the 30th night, whichever one, and you are engaged in Salah and you feel in a good place, so to speak, spiritually, then although you may enjoy that, it's easier for you because the context is there. It's Ramadan, you've been fasting, everyone's doing ibadah around you. And when it's another time of the year and you're not feeling in that sort of good way, and then you are struggling to do ibadah, even though you might not enjoy as much because there's more exertion and effort, there's more mujahada, there may be more reward for you in this. And this is something to keep in mind as well. G. And another aspect is perhaps our distraction is because we don't give ourselves any quiet. So all this chatter on our phones and in our heads, in this social media, this kind of thing, so some of this has to be reduced massively for our own deen, dunya and akhirah. Ji.
One question about the journey of the soul after death,
Mhm.
about Jannat and Jahannam. We mentioned this, we discussed the start of it in the Jumu'ah Bayan. You can refer to that.
Journey of the soul before?
After death.
After death. Yes. So basically what happens is when a person is on their deathbed, then the ruh, there are two situations, there's two ways in which people die. One is in a moment, in a kind of an instant death. And the other is a gradual death, which is frequently the case. It doesn't happen in a single second, normally. So what happens is this process in which the ruh is extracted from the body is known as the state of sakarat. And this act is known as naza'. In the Quran, in Surah Al-Nazi'at, وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا. There are various tafsirs about what these oaths are referring to. One of the tafsirs is that they're referring to the angels who take the souls out of the body. And Allah Ta'ala is taking an oath by those angels, وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا, by the angels that drag the souls out of the bodies by diving into the depths of those bodies. And وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا, by those angels who open the bonds of the soul and take the soul out with ease. The Mufassirin say that the first verse is referring to the souls of the sinful. There's no mercy with them. They're being beaten, as the Quran says, يَضْرِبُونَ وُجُوهَهُمْ وَأَدْبَارَهُم, on their faces and on their backs. أَخْرِجُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ, they're being told to die by the angels as they are drawing their souls and being beaten by them at this time. And we don't see these scenes in this dunya, but they experience it fully when they're in this state. And the other situation are وَالنَّاشِطَاتِ نَشْطًا. So the angels gently and compassionately draw the soul out. Allah make us of those people. And this is like, the example is like a thread which you pull out of dough, out of flour. It comes out with ease. Now, the ruh and the jism, the body, are intricately tied together. And if you so much as cut your skin when you're paring your nails or pull your hair, one single hair is painful when you pull it because you're touching the ruh, the bit which is connected to the ruh. So how much pain will there be when your ruh is being dragged out? It's compared to dragging a silken cloth which is sticks to anything which is catchy, being dragged over a thorny branch. So what happens is the ruh begins to come out from the feet first, and it comes out all the way up. And this is why we're told that even in this state, the tawbah is accepted, مَا لَمْ يُغَرْغِرْ, until gharghara is when you gargle. Okay? So yugharghir in death, in naza', is when the ruh reaches the throat. Then it's too late. And the eyes are left open because when a person is dying, they're in those final moments, the scenes of the hereafter are opened up before them. And so they see their own ruh leaving their own body. And that's why the eyes are often left open looking upwards. And that's why once that's happened, so the light has gone, so to speak, there's no need for those eyes to be open anymore. The soul has left. What do? The adab is you close the eyes. You straighten the body, you close the mouth. You put a cloth beneath the chin and tie it over the head so that it remains shut, so that if the body cools down and it becomes stiff, then there's no difficulty afterwards. So you straighten the feet and then you cover the body until the ghusl happens. So this is the separation from the dunya. What now happens is the janazah happens, the tajheez, the takfeen, and then the tadfeen, the burial. The tajheez is the preparation, the takfeen is putting on the ghusl and so forth, and anointing the body with fragrance, and then the kafan, and then the takfeen, and then the janaza, and then the tadfeen, the burial, which should be done as fast as possible. And when the person is buried, then there is the questioning of the angels of the grave, Munkir and Nakir. They ask 3 questions. And they ask these questions very roughly. Man Rabbuk, who's your Rabb? Ma Dinuk, what's your deen? And what do you say about this man? And the person is shown the form of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if a person's been sincere and loyal to Allah and His Rasul in the dunya, and he's practiced the deen of Islam, he finds it easy to answer these questions. Otherwise, he stammers and stutters and he's completely clueless. He says, I have no idea. And so then, depending on how he responds, what happens is there are 2 different scenarios. One scenario is that he begins to enjoy his life in the grave now, and the other is he begins to suffer. And so what happens is, for the person who has answered the questions correctly, he's reached his grave with his iman and a'mal, a door is opened, and it's a door to Jahannam, and he looks to the scenes of Jahannam, the torment and pain and punishment and suffering there, and he's told, this is what you've been saved from. And then this door is shut forever. And he is so relieved and so happy as that he will never have experienced such happiness and relief before this, and nor will he after this. And then a door is opened to Jannah, and the fragrances waft into his grave. And he looks forward to the scenes of Jannah where he's going to go in future. And now he can rest like a person who has no worries whatsoever. He's treated like a royal, a VIP guest, and the grave expands beyond sight. And conversely, in the opposite situation, the person is shown, a window is opened to Jannah, and he sees the beauty and the comforts of Jannah and its luxuries and the happiness and bliss, and he's told the door is shut, and he's told that this is what you've missed out on. And he feels so much grief and sadness that he will never have experienced this before this, nor ever after this. And then a door is opened to Jahannam, and the foul-smelling scenes of Jahannam and the torment sort of pours into his grave, and then the sort of beasts of adhab and punishment break loose on him in his grave, and it restricts him and it crushes his ribs together. And all of these things are kept hidden from us in this dunya because it's a test. This is barzakh. But from time to time, there are events in which people observe these things as well. And there are examples in today's world, and there are historical examples of when a grave's been left open or our bodies had to be exhumed, and people have seen what's happening inside from time to time. Now, there is so much to say about the journey of the soul here, but let me just, in the short time that we have, just take you to another scene. Qiyamah happens, Hisab happens, people of Jannah reach Jannah, people of Jahannam reach Jahannam. And then what happens is, between Jannah and Jahannam, a sacrifice takes place. A sacrifice, a blood sacrifice, as they say. And this is the sacrifice of a goat, a black and white goat, amlah. And before the sacrifice happens, a call is given to the people of Jannah to look up, and they look out, and they look up, and they're asked, what is this? And they recognize it. They say, this is death. See, the symbol of death is a goat, a male goat. And just as when Ismail alayhi salatu wassalam, when his father was about to do the sacrifice, the fidya which was given in lieu of Ismail was a goat. So this is also in lieu of death. This is symbolic of death. And then the people of Jahannam are called out to, and they look up and they asked, what is this? And they say, this is death. They recognize it too. This is why if you see a goat, a male goat in a dream, one of its interpretations, and don't panic, your time will come when it's due, and it won't come before that and it won't come after that. But one of the interpretations of seeing a goat in a dream is death. So the people of Jannah, up to this point, they'll have been worrying. They'll have been worrying that we've reached Jannah, alhamdulillah, but we don't want to go from Jannah. We don't want to have to leave. We don't want to be taken out of Jannah. And the people in Jahannam will also be afraid for themselves. The people of Jahannam will be hopeful. They'll be hoping that perhaps one day we'll be able to get out of here. Now when this goat is presented, both will see death. And what will happen? It will be slaughtered. Death will die. And when death will die, the people of Jannah will be gleeful. There's no death now. And the people of Jahannam will be left in their despair. There's no death now. So these are just glimpses. The journey of the soul is, we can just get aspects of it. This will only be realized when it actually happens. But the real reality of the situation is that since we're talking about this on this blessed night, let's remember that the message of Ramadan is simply so that that journey can be made easy for us. And that the lesson of taqwa which Ramadan, this guest is teaching us, the guest, this Ramadan is a guest, it's coming, it's come, and it's going now. This message is meant to stay with us till next Ramadan. May Allah grant us tawfiq.
That's the last question.
Right.
We've got 9 others coming. We've run out of time.
Yep.
So we'll answer the rest of them tomorrow,
Inshallah, we'll have a session tomorrow and we can perhaps start a little earlier too.
They can listen to more on the day who die on the day of Qiyamah tomorrow on the tafsir.
Yeah, if you sort of tune into our dars at 1 o'clock tomorrow, then you can hear something similar. We'll be talking about some aspects of Qiyamah then too, inshallah. For now we conclude. Allah accept everybody, forgive our shortcomings. Wa akhiru da'wana.